Monarchs of Tudor England. There were 5 officially crowned monarchs, and they are Henry VII, Henry VIII, Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I. Henry VII was the first Tudor monarch. He came to the throne after defeating the Plantagenet king, Richard III, at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485 in the War of the Roses. The name Wars of the Roses refers to the heraldic badges associated with the 2 royal houses, the Red Rose of Lancaster and the White Rose of York. After Henry VII ascended to the throne, he married Edward IV's eldest daughter, Elizabeth of York, in January 1486, thereby uniting the houses of York and Lancaster and securing the Tudor hold on the throne. Henry VII inherited a government severely weakened and degraded by the civil wars. He managed to bring a much-needed period of peace and stability to England, setting the climate for considerable economic and population growth. In 1502, Henry and Elizabeth's elder son Arthur, having married Catherine of Aragon at the age of 15, died of an unknown ailment just 5 months after their marriage, leaving his younger brother Henry, Duke of York, as the heir. And this is our next hero, Henry VIII. Henry VIII is remembered in history as one of the most powerful kings, most famous or infamous, more exactly, of England. But perhaps he is best remembered for his 6 marriages. His first wife was Catherine of Aragon, his elder brother's widow. In an attempt to produce a healthy son, he divorced Catherine and went on to marry another 5 wives: Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr. The fate of the wives can be summarized as divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Closely bound up with Henry VIII's marriage affairs is the English Reformation he had unleashed. Henry's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, had borne 5 children, but only Princess Mary survived. He convinced himself that this marriage had been against the divine law by marrying a brother's widow. Therefore, he resolved to divorce. As Pope Clement VII of Rome would not allow an annulment of this marriage, he had to resort to drastic actions by breaking with the Pope and the Roman Catholic Church. Henry VIII achieved many of his political aims through the work of his chief ministers. Figures such as 3 Thomas, Thomas Wolsey, Thomas More, and Thomas Cromwell shined prominently in his administration. All of them were banished or executed when they fell out of his favor. This is the Hall of Christ Church, one of the most famous colleges in University of Oxford. This hall is also the filming place of the movie Harry Potter. In the front wall, we could find the portraits of Henry VIII and Thomas Wolsey. Guess what? They are founders of this prestigious college. Thomas Wolsey founded it in 1525 as the Cardinal College, and Henry VIII refounded it in 1532 as King Henry VIII's College. Besides contributing to education, Henry VIII is also known as the father of the Royal Navy by expanding naval forces and modernizing naval administration. Henry VIII died in January 1547 at the age of 55 and was succeeded by his only surviving son, Edward VI, whom he had with the 3rd wife, Jane Seymour. As Henry VIII's only legitimate son, Edward VI was only 9 years old when he inherited the throne in 1547. Edward Seymour, his uncle, and Robert Dudley took the title of Protector successively. Despite the fact that he was only a child, Edward had his mind set on religious reform. He was a fervent Protestant and carried out a series of Protestant reforms, such as Catholic bishops were imprisoned in the Tower of London. A Book of Common Prayer was introduced. Roman Catholic practices and decorations were eradicated. Priests were allowed to marry. Though Edward's reign was brief, it marks an important milestone in the development of English Protestantism. Edward fell violently ill with tuberculosis in 1553, and in order to guarantee a Protestant succession, he excluded his half-sister Mary, daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, from the throne. He transferred the succession to Lady Jane Grey, daughter of Henry VIII's sister Mary, and an overt Protestant. However, the country considered Mary the rightful ruler. She gathered a sizable army and deposed Jane, who was imprisoned in the Tower of London and beheaded 6 months later in 1554. Jane reigned for only 9 days, and that's why she was called the 9-Day Queen. Mary I was the first queen regnant of England. That is, a queen reigning in her own right, rather than through marriage, if we exclude the disputed reigns of Jane and Empress Matilda. She was a devoted Catholic and also nicknamed Bloody Mary for her persecution of over 280 Protestants in a vain attempt to turn the clock back and restore Roman Catholicism in England. She did manage to build into the English people a lasting fear and hatred of the Pope and the Roman Catholic Church. In 1554, Mary married Philip, King of Spain, who as a foreigner and a Catholic was not welcome in England. The marriage was childless, and England obtained no share in the Spanish monopolies in New World trade. And the alliance with Spain dragged England into a war with France, which led to the loss of Calais, England's last outpost on the continent, in 1558. In November, Mary died from an ailment that might be uterine or ovarian cancer, and so did her hopes for a Catholic England. Mary's half-sister, Elizabeth, the daughter of Henry VIII and his second wife, Anne Boleyn, succeeded her on the throne as Elizabeth I. Elizabeth I is one of England's greatest monarchs and the first monarch whose name has become a synonym for the era she dominated, the Elizabethan era. Upon coronation, she inherited a bankrupt nation, torn by religious discord and weakened by conflicts with great powers of France and Spain. Her first order of business was to eliminate religious unrest and reverse the Roman Catholicism restored by Mary. She managed to balance the interests of the Puritans and Catholics, and resolved the religious issue by the Elizabethan religious settlement, which re-established the Protestant Church of England and made her its supreme governor. Besides, Elizabeth successfully played against each other the major powers of France and Spain, as well as the papacy and Scotland. The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 is popularly viewed as one of the greatest victories in English history. She remained the Virgin Queen all through her life to consolidate the general policy of balancing the continental powers. In 1603, Elizabeth died without an heir. The crown goes to her eldest male Protestant relative, King of Scotland, James VI of the House of Stuart, which will be explored in our next week's lecture. Finally, it's time to review the Today's Monarch lectures. Let's go over the bullet points of each monarch and try to retain these ancient kings and queens in our minds. Henry VII, the last Lancastrian male, defeated the last Yorkist King Richard III in the Battle of Bosworth Field in the War of Roses. Married Edward IV's eldest daughter Elizabeth of York, uniting the houses of York and Lancaster. Bring the peace and stability to England. Henry VIII, one of the most powerful and infamous kings in history, notorious for his 6 marriages, started the English Reformation, Prominent chief ministers. Edward VI, a child king assisted by a council of regency, a fervent Protestant and carried out a series of Protestant reforms, excluded his two half-sisters from the succession and nominated Lady Jane Grey as successor to the crown in his will. Mary I, the first Queen Regnant of England, a devoted Catholic and nicknamed Bloody Mary. Unpopular marriage with Philip, King of Spain. Re-establishment of Roman Catholicism, reversed by her younger half-sister and successor, Elizabeth I. Elizabeth I, the first monarch whose name has become a synonym for the era she dominated, the Elizabethan era. Resolved the religious issue by the Elizabethan religious settlement. Defeat of the Spanish Armada. The Virgin Queen, Gloriana, or Good Queen Bess. That's all for today. Thanks for listening.